Welcome, everybody. Thank you for spending part of your Friday sliding into the weekend. I'm June Miller-Richards with Entity Academy, and we're so glad to have you here today for Entity Academy and WazU's Fireside Chats. Again, thanks for joining us on this Friday afternoon. I have the great pleasure of introducing Stephanie Stanton to you. Stephanie, who's a friend of mine, is a national TV news correspondent and career and business journalist. Stephanie's worked for such outlets as NBC News, Fox 11 LA, CNBC, Bloomberg, and so much more. She's also the creator and founder of CareerCheck.com, a website that encourages young women to pursue their passions, to land their dream jobs, which makes her perfect for us. And we're so happy to have you here today, Stephanie. Take it away.
Thanks so much, June. I am so happy to be here, excited to be moderating this fireside chat. This is going to be a good one, you guys. So joining us is Mahault Albarracin. She is a sexologist. Wow. She's also a web developer. She's the co-founder of Sexualis. She'll say it with a beautiful French accent in a minute. She's also vice president of the Manifesto for Women in Tech, director of operations at the Nestled Minds Network. And Mahault, thank you so much for being with us. One of the things I was reading your bio, I think this is a good way to start us off. You also described yourself as a militant feminist since the age of 4. Now, I have a 4-year-old, so I can definitely see my daughter probably following in these footsteps. But how does one become a militant feminist at the age of 4?
With their mother. My mother was very engaged. She had a lot of opinions. She tried to read to us. She tried to make us read. And of course, at 4-year-olds, you don't read, but you get read to. She kept pointing out situations when she saw things. She wouldn't be quiet. And I think she led by example. And so I remember as a child raging against things that didn't make much sense to me. And those were usually situations of inequality. I mean, neurologically, that makes sense. You're primed to respond to inequality and unfairness. And so I think as a woman, one of the unfairness that it becomes more and more clear to you as you become gendered and more aware of how scripts work is, patriarchy and how being a woman hinders your pathway a little bit sometimes.
Yeah, and thanks to people like you and Entity Academy, that is all changing for the better. So we're excited about that. But let's talk about, before we get into the tech side of it, take us back through your background, because you are a sexologist. So I want to find out what exactly that is, how you became a sexologist, and then you went on to found Sexualis, which is your company related to that. So take us through all of that side of it first.
Right. So I started high school in France, and in the French pathway, they tell you it's science, 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 science. And I started down that path, and I thought it was going to be fun. And I realized that the stress was becoming too much. And so I needed to do something different. So I moved to Quebec. And in Quebec, there is this sexology program, which is a bit like psychology, except it focuses on sex. And I'd seen all these movies with sexologists in them. And I thought, well, that sounds like fun. That sounds like somewhere I could explore and fulfill myself. And there's possibilities to have a career. As a clinician, we have this idea of what it is like to have your own clinical practice. And so I did a bachelor's. I started down that path, and I realized I did not care for it too much. So I did a master's in research, because I thought, okay, so what I really care about is actually science. I really do care about science. And it's not because I didn't take the scientific path that you can't do science, which is, again, another misconception. People think that science are just microscopes, but it's not. It's a process. As long as you can apply the process, you can do science. Then when I finished my master's, I realized I was still getting bored. I needed more. And I was looking at all these people around me doing all these amazing projects and having the power to create right at their fingertips with little to nothing. They could make an empire. And so I thought, okay, well, I want to try some of that too. I learned how to web develop. And then I realized, well, there are so many low-hanging fruits in the field of sexology, because it's a small field, and because a lot of the people coming from this field just don't develop the technological skills that they would need in order to fulfill their own needs. So with another sexologist who had knowledge of the clinical field a lot more than me, we developed this platform together where basically we offer access to sexologists. A sexologist is someone who helps you through some problems. It can be in your couple, it can be in your own sex life, in your own fulfillment, whether you have desire problems, pleasure problems, whether you have communication problems. And we now offer also programs. So we created self-help programs, and people can just come on our platform if they don't want to talk to anybody, because it can be intimidating, right? Sex is a taboo subject. They come and do a self-help program and they go along their way. And if they then, after the program, feel like now they feel a little better, they can go and talk to a sexologist.
That's really cool. And so again, taking that sexology background and training, you formed Sexualis, which is it's a website platform. Describe how that works.
So I built the front end and back end. So that's basically what a full stack is. I built the back end with Node.js. I created the infrastructure and the database, and then I created the nice little wrapper, which is the front end, with the help of some designers. Because the assumption that people who can code can also make something beautiful is misguided. I cannot make anything beautiful, but I can definitely recreate something you give me. So with the help of some designers, I built the entire platform, and now basically people can create an account on the platform, and then they're connected through our online portal through Zoom, and they can take appointments directly through our platform.
Oh, that's great. So more of a resource. So you connect people with people in need. So it's not just for you. I mean, you created it, but it's multiple people. Sexologists can sign up there, and then they can navigate and manage clients through the program, through the platform. What else can you do on the platform?
Well, you can do the program. So somebody who is not a sexologist, somebody who's a client who has a problem, can look through our list of programs. Right now, we have only 6 because they're really extensive. Like, they talk about a lot of topics, but it takes a long time to prepare them because these things just don't exist. These resources don't exist. So we've had to create them from scratch, working with teams of sexologists. Right now, there's 20 sexologists that work for us. And then they all work together to build programs about couple communication, about masturbation, about a lack of desire. So all these problems that can weigh really heavily on people's lives, especially during a pandemic, especially when your couple is pretty much the only thing holding you forward. You need to take care of it. So we happened to open in last April when the pandemic was just like hitting. We were 1 month into the lockdown. And so everybody finally realized that health tech is useful, that remote health tech is more than useful, and that you don't necessarily need to be with people in order to move forward in your own progress. It also highlighted the importance of, mental health. We really downplay the importance of mental health, and the consequences are dire.
Absolutely. And people want to ask I know it's a Canadian domain, but can you actually, Maria, can you share it? Can you go onto her website and share it? I think a lot of us would like to see it.
Absolutely. I just put the link in the chat. I was thinking that as we were chatting about it, but let me see.
Thank you. And then I know it's Canadian, but is it going to be in the US, or is that something that we here in the States can access?
You can definitely access it. Absolutely.
Okay.
We have some bilingual sexologists. It's just that sexology is a regulated practice. It's like doctors, it's like nurses. So basically we can't just protect everybody who comes to see us. If you were in Quebec, our Quebecer sexologists have a code that protects you and their insurances. And if there's a problem, you have recourse. If you're from the United States, the same recourse doesn't quite apply to you the same way. Of course, we're not trying to hurt you, but if something were to happen, you're not as protected. But yes, we are thinking of expanding at least through Canada, given the proper regulations, and in time, perhaps across the world.
Yeah, and that your site looks great, and it's interesting because I don't know. Tell me what you guys think about this, and Mahault, what you think as well. But I feel like Canada is a little bit more progressive of a country, and I don't know. And maybe I'm just not in that arena. But do you have sites like this in the U.S. that are competitors at this point, or is that fertile ground for you to expand down the road because of the cultural differences?
So we do have competitors, absolutely. I couldn't name them because our competitive analysis was a while ago. But, you know, and we haven't had to deal with American competitors in a while. We've been doing really, really well. So we've just been plowing ahead. But there are competitors, definitely, people who offer similar services. I mean, everybody who offers services on health tech tend to also offer self-help programs because, you know, same idea. It's less people to pay as an employee, but also people don't necessarily want to talk to someone when they talk about such heavy questions.
Yeah.
But the idea that that it is taboo, I mean, it's taboo in Canada too. Montreal is extremely progressive. It's definitely a wonderful city to live in. But even if something is taboo, it doesn't mean you don't need a resource for it. Like, for instance, a service that might put it into perspective, we have a service in Montreal called Stella, which deals with sex workers. And even if Montreal is progressive, it's not as progressive as being completely open and okay with its sex work world. But we still need it, and they still exist because they serve a purpose. And we realize that if you don't serve that purpose, the situation would be worse. So I think in the United States, even, I mean, it's evolved a lot. I think you've moved away from abstinence programs. Now most of the United States has realized that abstinence programs just don't work. They don't get to the result that they're trying to get to. So now it's risk limitation and education, proactivity. So I do think there's a market. I think people would be open for it. And to be very honest, the harder the taboo, the more the service is necessary because of anonymity of internet.
Absolutely. And can people be anonymous on your site if they need help? You know, because it is such a sensitive subject. How do you handle that?
So you have several options. If you want to talk to someone, you use the webcam, right? You have the webcam, you have the voice, but you could not put your webcam. You could just talk to the person. You could also write, there's a possibility to chat. And finally, you have the self-help programs where you don't need to actually talk to anybody. You can be entirely anonymous. I mean, you can also lie. Like the therapist isn't in a relationship with your name. The therapist is in a relationship with who you are now. So if you want to give me the wrong name as a sexologist, it won't hinder my therapeutic process with you.
Cool. Okay. So part of your site does give you access to a lot of data. So, you know, we have HIPAA rules here in the US and all of that. I'm not sure what happens with Canada, but do you get a lot of interesting data through your site? And what do you do with that data? What do you learn? What are some interesting things you can share with us about data?
So with Sexualis, we're not data-driven, and we're data-driven at Nested Minds Network because we do a lot of research, we do work, but we do gather some data with Sexualis simply because, I mean, because of the nature of mental health system, we do need some access to some data. So we do gather it and we keep it on secure databases. We are thinking about potentially expanding into research, but it wouldn't be for profit. It would be for actual healthcare and improvement and yeah.
Very cool. Okay, let's shift to Nested Minds since you brought that up. Tell us what that is, what you do with that, and what kind of interesting information and data that you garner from that.
Right. So Nested Minds Network started as a research cooperative because I work in a field that's called active inference, where it's the combination of physics and neuroscience, and we research how living systems evolve and coordinate. And you can do this computationally, but it has its feet in biological, social, psychological sciences. So at first it started as this regroupment of researchers, and then we realized that because it was computationally possible, we can do artificial intelligence and we can do it better because it's moving past entirely connectionist systems, it's moving past entirely symbolist systems, and it's becoming this more human way to conceptualize the artificial brain. So that's what we do. We create solutions based on active inference for anything, really, any problem you want to throw at us, we could probably solve it computationally. And so where data comes in is that we create models. We create models that will predict outcomes that you want to predict. So maybe what you want to do is predict what is something you can match with. Maybe what you want to predict is whether something will get an income. Maybe you want to predict whether someone will be sick. So we gather data from people who have information and require an in-depth analysis. Oftentimes what happens is that we deal with a variety of partners, some of which have some parts of the data, others have other parts, and the final one is the one who's actually going to apply the solution. So we create this connection that basically amalgamates all of the relevant information and turns it into analysis.
Can you boil it down for a simple mind person like me? Can you give me a case study, obviously without revealing too much information, or an example of how this works? Are people signing online and doing online surveys? Are you doing questions? Like, how are you? Give me like a case study, something that you think would be interesting or that you did recently.
For data?
Yeah, maybe like a simple example, if you have one. I just find it so fascinating.
So for instance, right now, we're working with MIT Media Lab and MasterCards to get some data about consumer behaviors so that we can predict how better to make loans to small businesses, not in relation to how well they're going to do or their FICO score, but how they're going to improve the community as a whole and the resilience, the economic and well-being metrics of the community. So that's one of the ways we work. And so the data is gathered naturally, automatically by MasterCards. Every time you make a purchase, MasterCards has data. We have the MIT Media Lab who gathers data through, as you said, surveys, but also partnering with a variety of people who just online, every time you go on a website, there's data in there. Every time you go on your phone, there's data in there. So they just gather a bunch of this data. And they work with cities a lot. Cities do a lot of census. I don't know what the plural of that word is, but they gather information. They do surveys. So a partnership with cities and partnership with companies.
Very cool. I was looking at the chat and Sandra was asking about, I think she was going back to Sexualis. Do you pay for the service, which I think you talked about Canada being different. It sounds like there's some insurance because you guys have national health care. But if you do pay with a credit card, you don't really stay anonymous. So with the service in Sexualis, do people pay out of pocket for that, or is that covered under your Canadian healthcare plans, or both?
So it can depending on the service we offer. So we have psychotherapists who are reimbursed by Social Security. But the problem is that if you're on the internet, you're never truly anonymous. However, we don't take the credit card information. We deal through a third party. So we don't, that's the one thing I wanted to avoid, is having this information about people, not having to store it on, because if there's a leak, that's a huge problem you don't want to have to deal with. When you deal with sensitive information, as much as possible, externalize it to a service that actually is specialized in this, has good protection. Because the truth is, you're never safe, because there's always a hacker out there who can hack, but you can be safer. And I didn't feel that me or my team was going to be able to take care of that in the way that it would have required for people to be as safe as possible. So we externalized that.
Yeah. Let's talk about the tech side of that. There's some questions here. What are the different software platforms available to present your data? What do you like?
So that's a complicated question, because present your data is not, it depends what you want to do with the data, really. Like, for instance, what are you trying to show? What are you trying to say? If you're trying to show someone some very overall metrics, then what you want to do is get the right chart for the metric, in which case, well, there's libraries for this. For instance, if you use Python, you can use Plotly. That's a very good library for that. You can use libraries that already exist, NumPy, Pandas. All these libraries are really meant for you to present your data. So the question being vague like this is a bit hard to answer, but I'd say if you're trying to just show your database, your data set to someone for them to purchase it, you'd want for them to be able to query it. So any sort of API you could create, so where they could query some piece of it. If you're using data that is not stored in a computationally efficient way, but mostly like you gathered it by hand. Airtable is an extremely good way to show subsets of data, to show it to some clients. So that's the kind of things where you can deal with, but it's large. Presenting data is a field in and of itself.
Right. Yeah, I can imagine. Let's talk about, we were kind of talking a little bit about the left brain, right brain, and some of the misconceptions that we as women have been taught regarding technology. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and your thoughts on that?
Large? Which part? Like the myth around women?
Yeah,
I mean, left brain? Or?
Yeah, because, you know, when I think of us like a sexologist or people that study psychology or sociology, I don't necessarily put them in the tech bucket. And you've kind of been able to navigate both, which is really cool. And you talked about some of the misconceptions that we're taught and how that's changing. So I'd love to just get your thoughts on that for the group.
Yeah, so I mean, of course, all of this is inside a gendered matrix, right? So we have ideas about these binaries about what is a man, what is a woman. We have ideas about what is appropriate in terms of roles, motherhood, fatherhood, and then there's everything that comes down from that. There's qualities associated with one, qualities associated with the other, and then based on these qualities, there's an assumption that you can optimize for certain positions, right? So you'd assume that some people, because of their qualities, would be better at math, and some people, because of their qualities, would be better at language. There's some data that shows that more socialized individuals tend to be better at language, but it has to do with the socialization, not their gender per se. So yes, there are these myths that women are not meant for systems thinking. That's one thing that came out a lot, that women don't systems think, and so they can't really be good engineers. And that's a myth. There's no actual real neuroscience behind it. And the very few people who are trying to take it into neuroscience are being debunked by people with more rigorous methods. One thing you have to keep in mind is that when you do research, when you create something, your assumptions are baked into your methods. So for a long time, everything we tried to look into in terms of gender, we were actually inputting into the research. So it felt like we were confirming our ideas really, but we weren't confirming ideas, we were creating those ideas. We were creating that reality. There's a lot of books showing that when science moves into neuroscience, it has a credibility. It creates the reality that it talks about. And so because of the authority around such fields of science, now we believe that women are less or men are better at certain things. And this translates into where we push women for school. We tend to push women to go into the linguistic fields. We tend to push men to go into the mathematical fields. And then we see this shift happening where in high school and universities, there's more men in one field, more women in another field. And this translates into the working environment. The problem is that even when the field becomes a little more equal, when more women go into math, when more women go into physics, they still get booted out of the world, of the tech world, because it's so toxic. There's the proportion of women coming out of universities has increased to something around 20 to 30% for the mathematical fields, but it's still not that for the tech world. It's still not that for the physics world. It's still around 10. I think in AI in Canada, it was around 9 to 12%, which is ridiculous. The field requires diversity. It requires perspectives of people who are going to be able to see when there's bias in the data. So because we are talking about data, a lot of problems that have been happening is that it's historical data. But the people who have never suffered from these historical biases don't see that it's a necessity to shift the way we think about data. And because we've had more and more diversity in the fields, Google has made a lot of steps in that direction. We found that if you change the way you understand your data, you change how your tools behave, and you can remove some parts of oppression. So if you want to go back to the point about how I've navigated that world, I used to think I couldn't do math. I used to think I couldn't code or be a person that wasn't constrained in these boundaries. And then slowly I just broke apart all of these assumptions and just be like, well, just try, do one thing. It doesn't matter if you fail. No one expects you to do it. And so, well, I kept doing and I kept doing and I kept realizing, wow, all these assumptions are just false. I can do it. And now I'm director of operations in a field that is extremely far from where I started. I can code in 3 different languages. I can do these things. I am a modeler now. So I think it was an empowering process for me, but I think it's important for me to show that there is no set path. Even if you start somewhere, you can 180 entirely, and no one's there to stop you, really.
I love that. What you said coding in 3 languages. What languages can you code in? What's your favorite? What's your best?
I think I'm becoming very partial to Python, which will make my partner very happy. He's been trying to sell me on Python, and I'm becoming a big fan because the libraries are amazing. The possibilities are great. You can do so much so easily. And it's meant for you to use it. I used to code very much in JavaScript, and I thought it was all the rage. I thought it was everything. And then I started realizing that these convoluted loops I had to go through to get what I wanted are just there in Python. In Python, it's one word. So I've become a little bit partial to Python.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Do you think that, talk about your thoughts on technology and women around the world? I mean, obviously we're in the US and Canada, it is growing. There's still a long way for us to go, but we've come so far. How do you think things are looking for the rest of the world?
It's hard to make a generalization because there's interesting things happening. So for instance, in India, which is a highly gendered culture, oddly enough, the gender divide in terms of how many women go into each field is actually less than in countries where we consider ourselves to be less gendered and more egalitarian. So it's not as easy as saying, well, in this country they're this way, in this country they're that way. However, in terms of company culture, it is true that let's call it less progressive countries will probably make it harder for women because of the gender toxicity. And this, it has very little to do with tech. It has to do with the way we interact with one another. I know that in France, it would be relatively harder for me to do what I'm doing right now. People would not have had the openness to just give me a chance. They just wouldn't. And it's not even that they would have been malevolent or anything. I just wouldn't have fit in that pattern of their mind. Whereas here in Montreal, because all bets are off, people gave me a chance. I said, I want to do a PhD in cognitive computing coming from sexology. And they were like, oh, why not? Whereas I think in France, the system would have been so rigid that they would have been, no. You need to go through a different channel for this. And I don't think you can make that channel because you've already reached the threshold where you were supposed to have reached that channel. And it's the same in the working world. Perhaps in the USA, it's a little bit different than Montreal specifically, because there's still some sense of dichotomy, but you have a lot of large cities where these norms are shifting. You have incredible hubs of culture where non-binarity is becoming, if not the norm, absolutely normal. So this culture might change. And you have also a lot of people who are very vocal about this, where changing the tech world, changing the tech culture is becoming part of our common discourse. So you can't just get away anymore with sexual harassment. Like it's becoming clear now. We're giving people consequences. And so the tech world, for a long time, there wasn't that many women, so sexual harassment was a thing, but not as much as other fields where there might have been a little more mixity. But if you go into an office now and they harass you, you can go to some kind of authority and there will be consequences. You can rely on that knowledge.
Yeah. Suzanne had a really interesting question, which this is something I wasn't unaware of. Suzanne says, do you think having grown up speaking a binary gendered language affected your drive for overcoming gender myths? And do you think you'd have been likely to follow your life path if you had stayed in France? So yeah, talk about the French language versus, obviously Spanish, English, he, him, her, she. I wasn't aware of that. So it's fascinating.
So Spanish is also gendered. French is gendered as well. I mean, English is not gendered in that sense. That is true, but so I think that has made it easier for me to bloom, because I happen to be non-binary. I wrote a book about gender fluidity and sexual fluidity, but I think the genderedness of the language also comes with an emphasis on gender in the culture as well, because it's simply baked into your perception. You cannot avoid perceiving someone as female if your language drives them as female. And so because I've been faced with this, and having a mother so feminist, this reality was uber salient to me, and quickly became a problem, a cognitive dissonance I had to fight against. And then I was thrown into a very different culture where all of this cognitive dissonance went away, and I had to figure out why is this going away? Why am I not feeling so bad all the time? And it was because, in fact, my genderedness was not as emphasized. It was not as important.
That's interesting. Yeah. Can you talk about your background and how being non-binary, how that evolved, and then how that maybe helped you navigate into the world of sexology and maybe even forming Sexualis? Tell us about that.
So that's an interesting question. And you'd think the answer would be that it made it easier, but actually, it actually made it harder, because it's not because you go into sexology that you necessarily share beliefs about what constitutes fluidity or normalcy. And in fact, in a lot of clinical fields, normalcy is important, because that's how you define how to bring someone back, right? And so deciding that you need to reconstruct the very concept of normalcy, and that you need to deconstruct maybe the need for it, is kind of antithetical to clinical practice. So sexology, and maybe this is one of the reasons why I moved away from it as well, because I realized that there were a lot of limiting thoughts, limiting paradigms that I wanted to move past. So that was one factor. If to get back to the question about France, if I'd stayed in France, and let's say I'd done sexology in France, I would have never been able to be where I am today, simply because in a lot of places in the world, including in France, persecution is violent. It's not simply people will frown upon me. They would insult you. They would beat you up. So it's I'm blessed to be in Montreal.
That's great. That's great. Let's talk about women and advice that you want to give to women who want to navigate the tech field as it is now, and make those strides that you've made. What advice do you want to give? Because we talked about this. Things are changing, but there's still work to be done.
So there's several layers of advice that you'd want to give someone. The first one is relatively not gendered, but it's a good one to have if you're trying to change field. Learn the key languages. Just don't assume that there's just one thing you need to learn. Like, understand a pathway that might take you to where you need to go, and actually buckle up and go through that pathway. But take it small steps through small steps. Like, it seems daunting, but once you start, it kind of bootstraps into something useful. For instance, Python, take as many trainings as you can in machine learning. That will definitely help you. It's an extremely in-demand skill, and it will allow you to understand a lot of the tools that are being developed right now. Find a place, a field, a piece of anything that you're passionate about, because that will keep you through the difficulty. If you're just running on something like, maybe I should do this, the difficulty might take you down, and it might be hard on your mental health. So find something you're passionate about, which allows you to tune it out and just keep going and figure out what your line is. Because if you have a line, then you don't need to question yourself. You know where you're going. Then I think the second layer of this is build a network. Find other women, reach out to other women, find a mentor, socialize, create the network. You can be the change you want to see. If you create that network, you'll be helping yourself, but you'll also be creating a culture where other women are now proactive in creating this environment where they are safer, because there's some realities you won't be able to share with just anyone. You need to be able to share it with others who are going through the same thing. But also like when there's an opportunity, this network will pass it on to you in priority, because one of the problems is opportunities get passed through, and I'm going to quote this in the most tender way possible, tech bros. They are networked. They talk to one another. They give each other money. When they have a startup, they seed it. Having the same network for you will really change your trajectory.
Yeah, great advice for sure. Tech bros, we could do a whole hour on that. Okay, here's a question. This is an interesting one. Have you ever had an unsupportive response to a prejudiced interaction from the company that you were working for? And if yes, what steps did you take following the organization's inaction to either improve it or raise awareness to it?
So this one, my answer is a bit ambiguous because I was the unsupportive party. So I worked as a web developer for a man and some colleagues in a relatively small firm, and he sexually harassed us like daily, unabashedly, not hiding. The men were laughing, and we were three women, and it was all about us. It was really very clear. At the time, I was desperate for a job. I thought that if I just laughed along, it would just kind of go away. He would leave me alone. And I was scared. And I eventually left that job because of that harassment.
Can I ask you a question? Interrupt you for a second. How old were you when all this was going on? And how old are you now? Because we should also talk about the age, young women versus mature women and their approach to these types of things.
It wasn't long ago. It was like 3 years ago. It was 3 years ago when I really started shifting entirely the field. Now today I'm doing really well, but it's been a ride, and from where I started, so I wasn't that young. I mean, everything is relative, of course, but I mean,
I just feel like younger women tend to be more victimized to these types of things, at least in my experience. I mean, I know the times are changing, but I think when I was younger, I was more likely to be a victim of harassment, leering, whatever, and then you just, like you said, you just kind of like laugh it off and just kind of hope that it goes away. And I don't experience as much of that now, thankfully. So sorry, interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, but you make a good point, and that there's a lot of correlations there. One of them being when you're younger, you're usually at the start of your career. You don't have power in your industry. You can't really push back. You're usually at the bottom of the ladder. But also, I mean, I think it might be different for the women today, the younger women today, because they have been raised to understand certain kinds of behaviors are not okay. They have been raised to snap back if they need to. But it's not ubiquitous, and it's not perfect, and we still have situations of oppression where you literally your only choice might be to laugh. But on that point, to this day, I regret not standing up for my colleagues. I regret laughing, not doing anything, and I know that I wish I had reacted differently. After that experience, I decided that I was going to do the change. I wasn't going to wait for someone to save me, or I was going to change the culture myself. And so I'm not quiet anymore when someone speaks over me. If someone says something upsetting, I mention it. If someone invalidates what I'm saying or my feelings, I don't invalidate my feelings. I say, no, I'm right to feel the way that I'm feeling. I'm not crazy. This is happening. And if I'm feeling this way, something must be wrong. It had a cost. It means that I can't just work in any given environment that feels wrong, or that treats others wrong. It means that I am loud. It means that I'll get noticed. But I think because I have such privilege, a supportive partner, because I have degrees already, because I've built things now, I've built my own company, so I'm the one that decides. No one can fire me. So I have these privileges. So whenever I work with other parties, I use that privilege to push on things that don't feel right. But I also understand that not everybody can do that. So that's why it's important, if you do have such privilege, pave the way for the others in the world. Try to build the networks, as I said, be the mentor, bring others up with you. And that, I think, that really changes the game.
I think that's great. And Brenda wanted to say that, you know, she said it was encouraging that you went from desperate to keep your job to doing well in just 3 years' time. So hats off to you for that. You talked about having, you know, being in a position of privilege now and helping others. I think that is so critical, which is, you know, what Entity is doing. That's why we're here. We want to encourage other people. So thank you for that. And while we're talking about the way that you do your business, let's talk a little bit on the client side of it. Couple of questions. What are the best ways to persuade a client? And then what are the mistakes made in client relationship management?
So I remember that question, persuade a client. I'm not quite sure what you'd want to persuade the client of. And so that's, I think when you think about the question, you need to flip it. You're not there to persuade the client. You're usually there to listen and understand fundamentally what they're trying to tell you. And I think we often come with this, we have an expertise, we know something, and the client doesn't. So we assume that we probably know better. And they assume that they know what they're talking about and you're just a tool. So there's like this disconnect. And so one of the ways to manage this disconnect is to really address, okay, well, first let's dig into what is your problem. Why are you trying to do what you're doing? And what are your expectations of me in that pathway? Once you have all this, lay out, if you're trying to persuade them that, for instance, this solution just isn't possible. Like you literally can't do it. And they think you can. Well, you show them why not. Like use what they've been explaining to you in relation to their own needs, their own purposes, their own resources. Use everything that they gave you that you did listen to, and now you're like, given all of this, I can't do this. Or here's what you've asked me to do. Here's the solution we could go to together. Using your information, I'm realizing this one might save you X, might make it faster. What do you think of this? But never assume that you actually do know better. The client is the expert of their own little world. They know why they're here. So I think it's about putting yourself in a listening position at first, gathering as much information as you can from what they're telling you, and then flipping the script using their world, not yours. You can never relate to someone simply coming from where you're coming from. You need to bring them into your world or yourself move to theirs.
Mm-hmm. How about marketing? How do you market yourself? What outlet brings the most clients?
Again, so market myself as an engineer, as a worker, or which companies, because depending on the company or what your purpose is, you'll market something very differently.
Mm-hmm. How about yourself? You know, for people, you know, we are our best advocate. I know you have multiple things going on, so it's kind of a unique, you probably have a couple different answers for that, but just maybe in general, how you market yourself.
So, and no one's going to like that answer. I've stopped marketing myself. I used to, and then I realized that I was reaching out to people who didn't want me there. What I started doing is I started creating something others wanted, and then they brought me into what they needed. So it's less of pick me, and more of I don't need you, but if you want me, here I am. So it's I'd say don't broadcast necessarily, but do create the value you think you have in you. Like if you want to start, like don't wait for someone to create a website. Just do it. Create the website. Don't wait for someone to create the software. Do it. Like if you have some time, put some time in there, and people will start seeing that you have something to offer. They will come to you. Of course, then there's the bland answer of definitely be on LinkedIn, definitely have a good profile, have a resume ready, you know, these kinds of things. But it's I think the best way to get a job in this industry is by connection. So it's socialize, know people. This is the blender aspect of the answer.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, that's all great. That translates across many fields. Sandra had a comment here. She's interested to hear more about what you think of the connection between trilingualism or language learning and the field of data science. Sandra says that she's also trilingual and not very skilled or experienced in math, but she does see a correlation between language learning and algebra when she had algebra in school. She also likes what you said about us women being able to think in system. She said she suffered an accident that erased 5 early years of her life. And now she's betting on herself to get into the data science world. And she's very impressed by you. Wow, Sandra, maybe you could jump on here. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And then we can talk more about the language aspect, because I want to hear about this accident, what happened. And we're glad you're okay.
Well, it was a car accident. I was run over by a car when I was 4.5, and so if you imagine the height of a 5 years old, and so the blunt of the force I received in the head, and I was 7 days in coma, and when I woke up, I couldn't recognize anybody, you know. And by the time I was living in France, actually. And at that particular time, we were living in London, and we lived 9 months in London. But after the accident, I forgot the English. Wow. I totally was raised until I retook it in school, you know. But then, funny enough, when I moved in the US, I was a year that I wasn't able to speak English at all, you know. So, yeah. So I was. But somehow I see a correlation mathematically in the language learning. You know, I don't know why. I don't know. You know, I cannot explain myself in that regard because I don't have but I see a pattern somehow. You know, especially my simple way of explaining it is that, you know, when in algebra, when you plug values, right? And so to me, when you learn a foreign language, you also plug values into parts of speech, you know? So that's where I see that's where it goes somewhere.
Connection, you know? Yeah. No, but that's actually very interesting. And there's been research in those fields. If you want to read more about it, you can read about Chomsky and Fodor, who basically think like you. I mean, we've moved on a little bit from this perception of linguistics as symbols, exchange of symbols, but basically that's what it is. And what is math? Well, it's an exchange of symbols across different fields. So yeah, abstraction, absolutely. So yes, you're right. There is definitely a sense that if you're skilled in learning languages, you can be skilled in understanding mathematics. The one thing is, it does rely a lot on logic, which is a part of your brain that evolves, that had over evolution has evolved a little later than the linguistic part. So, you know, we're more skilled, and it's easier for us to pick up language than we are at picking up complex math. Whereas you and I can do heuristic, like absolutely, right? We can calculate easily. There's things that come naturally. Language we can pick up literally just by being with others. Math takes a little bit more effort because of this evolutionary gap, right? But there's also a sense, if you're trilingual, you probably have extremely good memory. You have a good abstraction. You have the capacities to make connections across different values, as you said. So yes, there's no reason you wouldn't be able to move forward with math and data science.
The only thing is that I want to get out of that thinking of that because of the accident and amnesia. I have memory problems sometimes. So I want to kind of like get away of that thinking and thinking, no, I'm not affected by that, or maybe I am, but I'm not gonna, you know, take that, take over my belief. But thank you, and I'm glad that you're here.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Sandra. We're glad you're okay, and thanks for sharing that with us and for joining in this important discussion. Yeah, I mean, Mahault, you seem like a person that is very positive. And you were able to go from, in 3 years, and it sounds like you sort of really turned your life around. Maybe this is off topic for a second, but is there anything you follow? I don't know, you just seem like a person that would follow like Dr. Wayne Dyer, or just some kind of like positive thinking, or is there anything you can give us to help maybe give us the confidence that you have?
So oddly enough, I'm not too big on mantras or people who tell you just think positive thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
But having been someone who destroyed boundaries, basically, the whole gender thing, and realized that maybe what you think isn't a limit. Maybe a limit isn't really a limit. Maybe you could just try. And if you fail, there's other ways to try. There's other things you can do. And I mean, I've been very lucky that every time I tried something in my life, I kind of did it. I just did it. And I think the difference between people who do things and people who don't is just you keep doing it. Literally, you just keep doing it. Of course, again, coming from a position of privilege, I've had a lot of chances. People believed in me. So it's not as easy as just try, but there is a sense in which, even if you're coming from a place where it's not going to be as easy for you, give yourself a chance. Just do one step, one little one. Congratulate yourself for the step that you've taken. It was hard. Not everybody takes it. Otherwise, everybody would take it. So be your own pat on the back, and surround yourself with people who will pat you on the back. A lot of people will try to break your confidence because it's easier, because it's cheap gratification for them, and also because you might be disrupting their vision of the world. Find people around you who really do believe in you and who tell you they believe in you when you maybe forget it.
Yeah, I know that's all great advice. Thank you for that. Suzanne had mentioned Oliver Sacks wrote some really good books about brain plasticity and reworking your brain after trauma. So Sandra, maybe that's something to look into. But Brenda had a good comment here talking about the tech bros. She's asking any tidbits of advice for getting them to be bros to us women. She says, I mean, if they have existing networks, how can we tap into those networks as well as building networks of women? So that's a good point. I mean, are we at a place in this world where we can sort of infiltrate the tech bros? Like, is that a true test? Like, are we really in a world of equals?
No, we're not. We're not there yet.
I was afraid of that.
But we do have allies. First of all, there are women in these spaces now who can pull you up. There are diverse individuals who understand what it is to be persecuted or oppressed. So there's space for you. But there are also people who are in fact allies. You just have to in fact meet them. You have to either be lucky or search them out in areas where they regroup. There's always gatherings for people who believe in the same things. If there isn't, you can create it. You can be the source of this new gathering where people will listen to a message you believe in. So this all aside, let's say that you know some people who are not yet your ally tech bros. If you have the energy, talk. Like, exposure is more than half the battle. If they see you and exist around you, a lot will change. It's not always enough. If it isn't, then just keep talking. I've myself been in these very toxic tech environment where men literally cut me off as I was talking. Like, I mean, it doesn't sound like much, but it's such a sign that you don't matter, that people literally just talk over you to each other. It was such a striking sign. And these people, after month and month of talking to them, eventually they changed. They did. Now, it's not a promise that everybody will change, and you may not have the energy for that, which is why you need to find a network of people who will take over for you when you can't, who in your own company, if there are other women, other people you think might share your reality, socialize. Definitely create this little work group that you'll have together. Go out, vent, do all the stuff you need so that if you can't move forward, they can recharge your batteries, or they can take over for you. And this is how you break through the tech bros. This is how you get into this world.
And yeah, and all that to say, it does, you do deserve yet another pat on the back, because you are the co-founder of Sexualis, especially in such a, male dominated industry of tech. But the question I have for you is, when we look at tech, the big guys, when we look at the Jeff Bezos and the, Mark Zuckerbergs, and all of those guys are still men. Yes, there are more women in tech, but are women still reserved to those secondary roles? And are we going to soon start to see more of more, major leaders in tech who are going to be on the Forbes list and who are running these big tech companies? Like when's that going to happen? Crystal ball.
When we stop offloading emotional labor and invisible labor to women, when we realize that what we do has value, it's not expected of us, and it's not just natural. Everyone should do it. And it starts at home, right? That whole thing when you take care of the children, that's your job. But when the father takes care of the children, oh, he's so nice, thank you so much. No, not thank you. You made those with me. Like you should be there with me. And it's the same. It's the same in reality. In the workplace, I became director of operations because I was doing that role. I was organizing things that were not being organized. It had to be me. But that says something. That says that I took it upon myself to make sure things were running, because the others just were like, whatever, it doesn't matter, right? They can focus on what they want and somebody will take care of it, right? So until we realize that some of the work we do is not being recognized, some of the functions that we fill are not even recognized as functions, I think we'll be limited. So I don't have a date for you, but I do have a landmark.
5 years, 10 years, come on.
I want to say we're moving towards something like in 20 years, we'll probably be closer to equality. We're moving there. But as you've said, the Jeff Bezos of this world, the Elon Musk of this world are gathering a lot of the resources. So the gap is increasing. So this might also be setting us off a little bit.
Interesting. Does anyone else have any thoughts you guys want to jump in about after this conversation, just about personal experiences, inequality, things that you guys want to share on this call? I just think it's just such an interesting conversation, and seeing, where Mahault has come, and well, since no one's jumping in, let's ask where you're going. What's next for you? What other big goals are you aspiring to?
It's funny. I've been checking off my bucket list recently. Like, I founded a company. I'm now director of another. I wrote a book. I got my master's. I'm getting my PhD. I think it would be nice to be a recognized researcher in my field. So I think I'll be pushing on that aspect, because I'm running some labs, but I think I want to publish more. I want to be recognized as that. I think I would really love it if I could be part of the change that brings us a more human AI. So that's the next for me.
And tell us about that. What would that look like? How would you do that?
A more human AI? Mm-hmm. I think it's an AI that, first of all, has the similar types of drives as we have, and is capable of factoring in the kinds of information that we do in the same way. So it's about how information gets clustered and passed up and down. It's mm-hmm. about how it enables coordination across the brain or across, the system. And so I think a more human AI is an emotional AI. It's an AI that factors in how people feel, why they feel this way, what are values, what is society, what is the context, something that's anchored in the real world. That's the next human AI.
That's cool. Maria's asking, tell us about any current projects, anything you want to share with us that that you're working on?
Yes, but you'll have to not tell. I just worked on an AI artist. We just created Huxley, who creates art from his own dreams. So AI, Huxley thinks. Huxley creates beautiful pieces, and through these pieces, we created the music video for Duran Duran.
Cool.
Yeah,
Wow,
a little bit.
I love it. And is that a new song? Has the song come out yet? Is that a new song that they're working on?
Yes, and they'll be performing it at the BB Awards.
Nice. Well, congratulations. That sounds super exciting and fun. Wow. Speaking of AI, like I find AI is so fascinating, such an emerging field. But kind of what you describe is in some levels almost sounds a bit scary. Like, it goes back to the debate of like, how much should we delve into AI? Like, are they replacing us? That whole thing is, how do you feel about the future of AI?
The same way that I think about cars or elevators. You don't have to be replaced. You just have to rethink your place in the system, and you have to understand the new possibles. If right now we don't see the new possibles because all we have is what's currently there, and we're thinking, well, if we add this building block here where I was, then I don't have a place. But think about it. If you move above the building block, you now have this new horizon that opens up to you. And this is what happened with most industries. Every time a new industry opened, new roles, new problems open, new necessities. So I think the main problem will be making sure that everybody is properly accounted for in every transition that we do, so that if we do automate some role, the people who were before doing that role do not get left behind. It doesn't mean the next generations won't have that problem, but the ones currently will, and that's a big issue, right? It's the whole coal mining industry, that debacle, that was an AI, right? But it's the same idea. But now if you just forget about coal and the people slowly move away from coal, people still have jobs. It's going to be about understanding where the resources that we create go. That's, I think, the main issue, because since we automate, the person who owns the automation gathers more resources that don't have to go back down. So I think that'll be the tricky part.
That's cool. And Maria was asking, how do we get into the field of AI as beginners?
It's not as hard as we think. Like we think it's like this complex world, but actually there's a lot of cool courses. Go on Coursera or Udemy, and you have like it'll teach you, or Code Academy even. There's very fun courses, very easy, available. Some of them are even free, and you just take it one by one, and then you'll learn how to use some tools, and slowly as you learn the tools, you'll be able to craft your own models. Of course, if you want a deeper understanding, I suggest you take an actual university level course or read some books about it. But if you just want to use the tools, then it's actually out there. There's courses online.
Very cool. All right. Well, does anyone have any final questions, thoughts? Sandra chiming in on the chat. She wants to invite you to research Humberto Maturana, who wrote The Tree of Knowledge and the Origin of Humanness in the Biology of Love. You may find him fascinating. I don't know if you're familiar with that, Mahault.
Yes, he died recently, but yeah, I am familiar, and he's absolutely a great author.
And someone else mentioned, I can't think of, I told my friend I was doing this chat and she said something, Perez. She said, oh, if she's into sexology, she'll definitely want to mention, was it Marilyn Perez? Okay. Sorry, I forgot the name, but I'll try to think of what that is. On another note, Brenda chiming in, I am passionate about DEI issues, so I wondered if you could answer a hard personal question, reflecting on when you were laughing along with the sexual harassment because you were earlier in your career. Was there anything that any of your coworkers could have said to you, or anything that could have brought you off the sidelines and convinced you to speak up or advocate for change? That's a really good question.
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, if someone had reached out to me, I would have felt less isolated, because one of the things that happens when you live through this, you feel entirely isolated. If someone had said anything, had said, I'm uncomfortable, I need something, I don't like it when you laugh, I think it would have been the trigger I needed to say something, to do something, even if it meant losing my job, because I did leave the job because of it. So I probably didn't need that much of a push. But then that's just me. I think being honest with your coworkers and being like, this makes me feel really bad. I don't know what to do. What do you think I should do? And I think most people, when they realize that you're really feeling something, you're going through something, that you're not trying to blame them, that you're not trying to create trouble for them, that you need something and you're reaching out for help, people are more likely to potentially get on your side and understand. They may not speak up, because it's hard to speak up. It's not easy, but they'll be there more. And the more people start being there and realizing, the more likely you are to eventually have the mass you need to actually be able to speak up. If there's 5 of you behind you, you're more likely to say something.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. Thank you for sharing that. All right. Well, anything else, any final thoughts here in closing? Is there anything that we didn't talk about, Mahault, that you want to mention to us or share with us to get us going? Maybe on the path of sexology or technology, some kind of ology.
There's one last point I think that is important in relation to client relations. Actually, 2 things. The first, I read one of the preliminary questions, and one of them was, what are the expectations of a client? And one of them also was whether I was dismissed by clients for being a woman. The first one that I'd like to answer is, the expectations change, but it is important that you did realize that they do have expectations, but you don't know what they are. And because you don't know what they are, you're going to go into a wall if you don't realize that you also have assumptions about what those expectations are. So lay it all bare. Really understand that you might have assumptions that are blocking you from seeing what they really need, or what they're trying to say, or the fact that when they say something, they meant something very different from what you're understanding. So really taking the time to lay down what those expectations are, but also what they should expect of you in terms of limits. So like, you can't work 45 hours a day. You can't work every day. If they expect you to work on the weekend and you need a life, then you need to make it clear. You're going to work this many hours at these times. They can reach you this way. They're going to check in X amount of time, but not more. If they check in with you every hour and it hinders your work, it's not going to help either of you. So setting the proper boundaries that work for you, for your work, in a nice way and early on, that will really change the dynamic with your clients, and it'll help you do your work more efficiently. And the last point, whether being a woman has hindered me with clients, absolutely. Absolutely. Working with mostly in large corporation men, it's really, they do not give me the credibility that they end up giving me after a month of work. At first, I have to claw for every meeting I'm part of, for every time I speak, every time I want someone to hear what I'm saying or consider my point, I have to fight for it. It does come eventually, but yes, it is a struggle. And that's why having allies with you in those meetings, coming prepared, not letting them talk over you, not letting them forget you said something, or take credit for your ideas. Do take credit for what you do and give credit back to people who worked with you, so that you create this culture where nobody just like pretends like they're a genius when really they're kind of mediocre and you did all the work for them. So yeah, those were the main points I think it's important to remember.
Yeah, thank you for that. The boundary thing is really interesting, because I am older than you, and I grew up in a generation where we were not taught that. I think millennials do such a better job at that, is setting those boundaries. I was taught work, never say no, do what they want. Don't fight for yourself. Don't even ask for a raise, because there's going to be, 500 people in line behind you, and you just got to keep your nose down and do it. And, that advice was really all wrong, in my opinion. and it took me a long time to realize that, because I would see millennials, and some of them, you know, get the reputation of being like, you know, who do these millennials think they are? They come in and they, you know, they're just, they want this, they want that, they want weekend, whatever. And at first it was a little unsettling because, you know, I was not taught that way. But now after hearing you speak, it is so important to set those boundaries early on. And it's, you know, that's something that I still struggle with being older. And I don't know if you guys can relate. I think it is a bit of a generational thing as well. So I applaud you for that. I am envious that I didn't have this skill set locked up when I was, you know, in my 20s, but you guys are doing a great job. And, you know, the younger generation is doing a great job in sort of setting those boundaries early on. So kudos to that. All right. Well, thank you all. I want to, I guess we'll wrap it up unless anyone has any other, that's a great way to end it. I want to thank you all for being a part of this. Mahault, thank you for sharing your time with us. It's so fascinating. And I love that we were able to explore issues, you know, beyond work and tech, because I think it all ties in together. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for all the questions.
You're very welcome.
There are a lot of people out here who have been asking if they can get a hold of you. We don't want to infringe on your time. If someone has a question or they'd like to connect with you on LinkedIn or somewhere, what's the best way for them to do that?
Oh, definitely LinkedIn. And I would strongly advise you to actually connect with me on LinkedIn so that you grow your network with people who can help you in the future. Yeah. Do I need to share my LinkedIn link, or is that part of a future package?
I mean,
do you want to help facilitate that?
Okay.
I can send that. I can take care of that.
But thank you so much for today. Everyone had a great time, and I'll say what Stephanie did. And I'm a little older than all of you, and what I love is that generations coming together, learning from each other, and getting stronger. Because you know what, we're living longer, and we all have something positive to say and good to say, and it's a great thing to have this wonderful network of women of all ages that can support each other. So I'm getting a little teared up here. So
I know, absolutely. I agree.
It's a good thing. So thank you
good.
again, everybody. Thanks for spending your time with us on Friday. Nice. We appreciate it, and have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.